When I went to a psychedelic retreat last year, I thought I would maybe face my fears or the darkest corners of my mind. Instead, the mushrooms kind of gave me my identity back. Healing trauma doesn't always come from logic. Sometimes it comes from story. So here's mine. Hi everyone, I'm Sam. I'm a late diagnosed ADHD, and generally speaking, I make content about autism and neurodiversity. The reason I haven't posted much in a while is because I have been very busy for about a year writing a book about autistic trauma. It's taken me over a year actually, and I'm almost finished with it, so I'll be very excited to be able to share that with you when it comes out in about another year. But today I want to talk about something a little bit different, but still connected to that topic, which is psychedelic healing. So as some of you might know, last year I went to a psychedelic retreat run by the Inner Shift Institute. They specialize in supporting all people, but especially neurodivergent people, in a really warm and safe group environment. The retreat included 2 full psilocybin journeys, and in this video I'm going to tell you about what happened during those trips and how they helped me process my trauma. I want to mention that this took place completely legally, but that mushrooms may not be legal where you are, so do use your discretion. This is just me telling you my story. Now, I've already done a video about how the retreat actually was. I did that last year, and I'll link that below so that you can watch that after this if you haven't seen that, because that does set the scene a little bit and explains a few things a little bit more. So this is kind of like a part 2, which has taken me a really long time to get to, by the way. Did I tell you that I actually wrote a book? It's like 80,000 words. Anyway, as a bonus for my community, the Inner Shift Institute are offering for you guys 15% off the price of their November retreat, November 2025, and also 10% off anything else you book with them. So just tell them my name. You've probably forgotten, and no, it's been a long time. It's Sam. Tell them Sam sent you. So let's start with the first journey. Now, one thing that is crucial when it comes to psychedelics and healing, as opposed to psychedelics for recreational purposes, is going in with an intention. And my basic intention going in was simple, but also kind of massive. It was to reclaim myself. And at that time, I'd been through 2 pregnancies, postpartum trauma. And to be honest, with 2 kids, it had been years of bodily upheaval, sleep deprivation, and an entire identity shift in becoming a mother. So I wanted to know who I was now, where that left me. And I was very open to just letting the mushrooms guide me. And the mushrooms actually gave me my answers in a surprisingly structured 3-part story. So the fact that we were lying down on mattresses, tucked into duvets with our eye masks on and just super comfy, it allows you to let the plant medicine do its thing, and you go inside your mind, kind of like a waking dream. I was surprised at how grounded I felt during the trips, but I will say your mileage may vary with that. They do take a lot of care to get the dosage right for each individual person, though, I will say. And bear in mind that these stories I'm about to tell you, they're part of a narrative, and obviously they're not to be taken literally. My brain likes metaphors, apparently. So let's start with the first trip, part 1. Part 1 was the story of grief. I dropped into what felt like the mushroom underworld, and I found myself at a funeral, the funeral of my children. The grief was overwhelming. I grieved not only for the terrifying moments I'd lived through, the intrusive thoughts I'd buried, the endless fears, but for every suppressed moment of grief since they were conceived. Then the grief expanded. I wasn't just grieving my children anymore. I was grieving as a mother among mothers. The impossible ache of loving someone you can't fully protect. An ache that goes back not just generations, but eons. So I experienced all that, and the scene came to an end. I asked the mushrooms, what next? And they showed me. Part 2, the landscape of emotions. I was still underground, but I was suddenly flying over hills ribbed with vibrant, shifting colors. If you're old enough to remember the old Windows 3.1 screensaver Bezier, you'll get the drift. I was shown my emotions as a colourful, shifting landscape. The mushrooms guided me through the ways I had always bottled feelings up until they exploded. They tugged at me in the places in my body where emotions were stuck, and they told me to let them flow. It was like I was given, after all these years, an education of what my emotions were supposed to be doing. I finally understood what was happening in my body, even if I couldn't name it. Then the mushroom said to me, "Why are you holding in your emotions?" I didn't have a very good answer to that, other than it's what I've always done. But I understood then that they were supposed to flow, not be held. Okay, what's next? I said to the mushrooms. Part 3 was the coronation of the Mushroom Queen. I was suddenly bombarded with royal imagery, crowns of all sorts, motifs, and even Disney princess imagery, everything royal. What was going on? The Mushroom Collective then took over, and they crowned me as their queen. At first, I resisted because it felt ridiculous, but they were adamant. I was really resisting this, but they said to me, somewhat exasperated, "You can be the queen of your own goddamn head." And in that moment, I knew who I was again. My identity had been revealed, the Mushroom Queen. This sounds very silly, I know, but what I experienced in that moment is very hard to put into words. This identity or title means something to me that I can understand, but I can't really quite articulate to others, so sorry about that. But it was like a reinstatement of self and a very profound moment to me. So I asked the mushrooms, "Okay, what's next? What's the next part? This is great. I'm learning so much." And they said to me, "You've done enough now. Let us take care of the rest." As a mother, someone telling you that you can rest now is always appreciated. After that, the rest of my trip was like having a team of mushroom robot janitors sweeping through my mind, clearing away the old thoughts and beliefs that no longer served me. This was a sensation or experience that I'd had when I'd tried mushrooms in the past, like a spring cleaning from my brain. And during this time, I felt alone, but not lonely. I didn't need anyone, not the facilitators, not my family. I was safe. I was separate. We were all just universe travelers on our own journeys, and I wasn't afraid anymore. At one point during all of this, the mushrooms let me peek behind the curtain into what I'll call the fourth dimension. Just a little peek of what's out there in the universe. Maybe save that for another time. But other than that, the main trip was over, wrapped up in a 3-part narrative that made a lot of sense to me. And for the rest of the hours, I rested and chilled and felt really good. And it was really great to write this down. I couldn't verbally process, I don't think, until the next day. Then we had the integration day where we talked a lot, and I felt like writing about it and talking about it, I've talked about it quite a lot since that time, was very, very helpful to make sense of it all. And then after that day in between, it was time to prepare for the second trip. So this time, for whatever reason, I went into the second trip feeling really, really nervous. I'd had a great time in the first trip. In some ways, I felt like the first trip had been almost too positive. Like this time, I had to go further and deeper into the corners of my mind and discover something awful and face the awfulness of myself or whatever. And so the first trip kind of gave me back my identity. And for the second trip, all I could think of was that my intention was just connection, just that one word, connection. And even before the mushrooms had kicked in or before I'd taken them, I had really felt my emotions rising. I was very emotional that morning, and I didn't want to be. Oh, the irony. I was looking for connection in the mushrooms, but when I was experiencing these emotions in a safe group, I didn't want to connect. It took me a long time to get started, and I was lying there like mind wide open, trying to go deeper, and all that I found was like dusty old rooms. They were very vague, they weren't vibrant hallucinations, it was just like vague shadows of dusty old rooms. And one of these rooms was like the room of Christmas sadness, which was odd. And I remember thinking like, okay, I don't think this is where I'm supposed to be right now. And it felt like it wasn't working this time. And the facilitator came up to me and was like, "Do you need a top up?" And then I realized I totally couldn't move my body at all. And I remember thinking, No, actually, I'm very high right now. But it had not gone to my mind at all. And instead of going to my mind, the mushrooms had gone to my body. So I was very awake, and I was not tripping like you'd imagine being out of your mind, you know. My body actually at that point was really glowing with warmth, and I realized maybe there's some physical healing happening. It certainly felt like a very healing glow. I had had chronic pain since pregnancy. Actually, since my first pregnancy was kind of when it started, and it wasn't like, oh, they suddenly took the pain away and now I feel neutral. It was more like there was a positive, good feeling, a good replacement for the pain that was there. Like I said, a warm, glowing sensation, and so that was very nice for a while. So I let that be. Um, if you feel something lovely, you just let that be, don't you? And then the contractions started. Now, if you've never given birth, I mean, I don't think there is a comparable experience to contractions, but experiencing those without being pregnant was interesting for sure. There were full bodily contractions of emotions all throughout my midsection. I was doing the breathing, it was all coming out, emotionally, not literally. And I realized at that point that I was in an emotional labor. I was giving birth to my trauma. And this wasn't the trauma from one event. This was a huge bundle inside of me. It was like the whole process of becoming a mother, the loss of bodily autonomy, the emergency C-section I had with my first, the endless screaming of my second, my newborn, who had terrible reflux for months and traumatized us all, including herself. The anxiety, the loneliness, the postpartum survival struggle, everything, all of it inside me. My trauma baby wasn't one thing, it was everything, and it had to come out. I knew that at that moment. It had to come out through a symbolic childbirth. I understood. So I labored, I pushed, no, I didn't really push. I held the hand of a stranger, my doula for this journey, who was one of the facilitators, and together we birthed my trauma. And I should point out, at the time, she had no clue what was happening. I couldn't really speak at the time because I was giving birth. But it didn't matter because she was there, and I went in with that connection intention, and that's what they gave me, which was really beautiful. And when it was over, I was completely exhausted, but very awake. I kind of waddled to the toilet at that point and realized this was 3 years postpartum, that the clothes I was wearing were pregnancy leggings with a hole in the crotch. And I was like, would the mushroom queen wear this? Uh, so I came back from the bathroom. My doula had moved on to someone else. And then I realized I wasn't quite done. So I birthed a little bit more trauma with another facilitator who was very confused when I whispered in her ear, I'm giving birth, don't worry, I understand. I'm really glad that one of us did. So after that was done, I felt exhausted, but also strangely energized and in love with the world. A lot lighter, like the weight of everything had gone, and the room glowed golden. It was sunny outside. I was dancing that afternoon, and I connected with others in the group, and honestly, I felt more alive at that moment than I had done in years. So both of these trips together, they were both quite intense emotional experiences for me, and together they were pretty impactful, as you can imagine. And I just wanted to connect them a little bit more with trauma and how it actually helped me heal. I have purposefully not shared my entire history of trauma with the internet, and I don't intend to. I've written about 80,000 words about autistic trauma, and that book is also not a complete tell-all about my life. But I want to just briefly mention here that I'm not one of those people that calls every negative experience I have a trauma. I'm very aware of what the criteria for PTSD are, and I did have PTSD after a head injury when I was at university that I don't believe is part of this story, so to speak. That's been processed. But there is a middle ground between bad experiences and PTSD, which I'm referring to more generally as trauma. And for autistic people in general, we are more sensitive neurologically to stress and trauma, and we have more bad experiences than most. So we might experience more trauma at things that don't count as traumatic under traditional definitions, and therefore maybe not even qualify for a PTSD diagnosis, even if we have all the symptoms. It's a bit messed up, to be honest. If you want to learn more, read the book that's not out yet. I also want to mention CPTSD, chronic or complex PTSD, which is not yet officially a diagnosis in countries that use the DSM, but can be diagnosed using the ICD. They are two different diagnostic manuals. So CPTSD and autism is very interesting because CPTSD is often largely considered an interpersonal trauma, like death by 1,000 cuts. And for autistic people, we generally have a lot of interpersonal trauma for a variety of reasons. So keeping all that in mind, I probably have CPTSD to some extent, but probably most autistic people do. Citation needed. I don't think they've done the studies on this. So with that all in mind, what did the mushrooms actually heal? How did it heal? The childbirth story, the second trip, I felt like was a release of pent-up stuckness. It was just an unnamed bundle of bad feelings and awfulness that had accumulated over years. The ability of the mushrooms to help release that, like, that seems fairly obvious how it's helped. It was very visceral and bodily based. The first trip with the 3-part story is maybe harder for you to see how that connects with trauma exactly, so I will try and explain. After both children, I experienced what could potentially be diagnosed as postpartum OCD or anxiety, basically intrusive thoughts about them dying. And each time I had these thoughts, I'd try and push them away with something. And for me, it was more of like a mental OCD. I've not been diagnosed, but that's what it was, a compulsion to make these images go away with replacement thoughts or whatever it was at the time. So the fact that the first thing the mushrooms did was brought me to the funeral of both my children was a way of forcing me to confront the weight of suppressing these thoughts and feelings over the years. Because each time I'd had an intrusive thought, it was like a mini grief feeling, and the funeral that was presented to me allowed me to process that finally. And it's important to say here, that mushrooms, I really believe in the healing power of mushrooms, but they aren't magic cures, and like, oh, I've never had an intrusive thought since. But it opened the doors to let me feel these things in a safe way. And since then, it's really just like it's cleared the backlog. And all of my feelings, even the bad ones, are more easily part of the everyday now. And I consciously allow them and I let them flow. And this is why part 2 of that narrative was such a light bulb moment for me, because they taught me how to deal with my emotions and what they were even about. And learning that has been really a turning point in my mental health long term. Now, the story about the Mushroom Queen coronation is interesting because it's less about trauma exactly, but more about how motherhood is not given the sanctity it deserves. The identity shift to becoming a mother is huge, and there's very little space to navigate that, especially if you have little ones with higher needs, like who don't sleep or who scream for 4 months straight, and if you don't have a solid support network. And once you're a mother, that's kind of it. That's who you are now. And it's not like that's not what I wanted, but there's a loss of identity from who you used to be. You can't go back, but you are more than just a mother. So who are you now? And the reason the Mushroom Queen imagery or metaphor is significant is because it's an entirely new identity that is not based around my relationship with other people. It's my genuine, truest self, and I'm aware of how silly that sounds, but I don't care. And looking back over a year later, I still can't fully explain what happened and why. I can understand it through what was happening to my brain, like neuroplasticity and serotonin, sure. But the truth is, for me, in terms of my healing journey, it only really makes sense as a story, and mainly as a story to me. I don't pretend to have all the answers about this, but I do know this. I experienced healing that I hadn't found anywhere else. I birthed my trauma and I felt lighter than I ever had. And I had a real afterglow after the retreat, which lasted around 6 weeks. But the deeper change has stayed. do feel more powerful, more confident, and more myself than I think I've ever been. And even my personal style shifted. I realized that what I want to wear can be summed up in 2 words, which is Mushroom Queen. Was all my trauma from my entire life healed? No, not exactly. But bear in mind, I've done a lot of therapy and I have done other trauma treatments, so I wasn't starting from scratch. And for me, psilocybin was more like a really great tool in my kit. So I'm sharing this not to tell you, oh, you absolutely have to take mushrooms, but to show you more that the power of the mind to heal under the right circumstances. And for me, that happened at the Inner Shift Institute retreat. For you, it might be something else. Again, if you're curious about them, check out my first video on the retreat itself or their website. And if you do decide to go, you can mention my name for a discount. Thanks so much for watching. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Do you think healing always needs to make sense logically, or can story and symbolism sometimes take us further? I'd love to hear. See you soon. Bye.